classic starts. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Retold from the Mark Twain original by Oliver Ho, illustrated by Dan Andreasen. Chapter 1, Scene, the Mississippi Valley 40 to 50 years ago, 1835 to 1845. Tom and the Widow. You don't know about me unless you've read a book called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that doesn't matter. That book was written by Mr. Mark Twain and he told the truth, mainly. There were some things he stretched, though. That's nothing. I've never met anyone who hasn't lied at one time or another, except Aunt Polly, or the widow. That's Tom's Aunt Polly. She and the widow Douglas are both in that book, which is mostly a true book, as I said before. The way that book ends, Tom and I found the money that the robbers had hidden in the cave and it made us rich. $6,000 each, all in gold. Judge Thatcher put it in the bank for us and we could each get $1 a day. We didn't know what to do with all that money anyway. The widow Douglas took me in as a son and promised to civilize me. It was rough living in the house all the time. The widow was so regular and decent in all of her ways. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I ran away. I got into my old rags and felt free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer hunted me down and said he was planning to start a gang, a band of robbers. He said I might join in if I went back to the widow and acted properly. So I went back. The widow cried over me and called me a poor lost lamb. She called me a lot of other names, too, but she never meant any harm. She put me in some new clothes again and I couldn't do anything but sweat and feel all cramped up. Then the old things started up again. The widow rang a bell for supper and I had to come in on time. When I got to the table I couldn't start eating right away. I had to wait for the widow to lower her head and grumble a little over the food. There was nothing wrong with the food, except that everything was separate. I was used to eating a stew full of odds and ends. Things in a stew get mixed up and the juice kind of swaps around and everything goes better. The widow's sister, Miss Watson, had just come to live with her. She sat after me on my first night back with a spelling book. She worked with me for about an hour, until the widow made her ease up. I couldn't stand it much longer. I went up to my room, sat by the window, and tried to think of something cheerful, but it was no use. I got so downhearted and lonesome I wished I had some company. Pretty soon I heard a twig snap down in the dark. I sat still and listened. I could just barely hear a meow. Meow. I said, meow. Meow, as softly as I could, and then I put out the light and climbed out of the window onto the shed. I slipped down to the ground and crawled in among the trees. And sure enough, there was Tom waiting for me. We went along a short path. Just as we passed the kitchen, I fell over a root and made a noise. We crouched down and laid still. Miss Watson's slave, Jim, was sitting at the kitchen door. "Who's there?" he said. He listened some more and walked near us. For minutes and minutes there wasn't a sound. He couldn't see us, but he must have known someone was nearby. He sat down on the ground near me and Tom and said he knew someone was there. He told us he would wait until we showed ourselves. He leaned against a tree and stretched his legs out until one of them almost touched mine. Soon he began to breathe heavily and then he started snoring, so Tom and I could finally get away. When Tom and I got to the edge of the hilltop, we looked down into the village and could see 3 or 4 lights twinkling. The stars over us were sparkling. Down by the village was the river. It was a whole mile wide and awfully still and grand. We found Joe Harper and Ben Rogers, and 2 or 3 more of the boys. We untied a little boat, floated down the river to the big scar on the hillside, and went ashore. We went to a clump of bushes, where Tom made everybody swear to keep the place a secret. Then he showed us a hole in the hill, right in the thickest part of the bushes. We lit candles and crawled in on our hands and knees. After a minute or two, the cave opened up. Tom ducked under a wall in the cave and crawled into another hole. We followed along the narrow path until we got into a kind of room, all damp and sweating and cold. Tom said, "Now, we'll start this band of robbers and call it Tom Sawyer's Gang. Everybody that wants to join has got to take an oath." We were willing, so Tom got out a sheet of paper with the oath written on it. It swore every boy to stick to the gang and never tell any of its secrets. If anybody ever did anything wrong to any boy in the band, one of the other boys would be ordered to get even with that person and his family, and he would have to do it. Everybody said it was a great oath and asked Tom if he made it up himself. He said some of it, but the rest was out of pirate books and robber books. He told us that every important gang had an oath like it. "Wait, Huck Finn doesn't have a family," Ben Rogers said. "How could we get even with him if he doesn't have a family? What are you going to do about him?" "Well, doesn't he have a father?" Tom asked. "Yes, but you can't ever find him these days. He used to get in a lot of trouble around town, but he hasn't been seen in these parts for a year or more. They talked it over and they weren't going to let me in the gang. Nobody could think of anything to do." I was almost ready to cry, but all at once I thought of a way. I offered them Miss Watson. They could get even with her if they wanted. That satisfied everyone and they let me in. Then Tom told us we would be highwaymen. "We'll stop stagecoaches and carriages on the road. We'll wear masks and take people's watches and money. We'll bring some of the people to the cave here and keep them until they're ransomed." "Ransomed? What's that?" asked Ben Rogers. "I don't know," Tom said. "But that's what they do. I've seen it in books, so of course that's what we've got to do. But how can we do it if we don't know what it is?" "Well, we've just got to do it," Tom said. "Didn't I tell you it's in the books? Do you want to do things differently from the books and get things all messed up?" "That's fine to say," said Ben. "But how are these people going to be ransomed if we don't know how to do it to them?" "Well, I don't know," Tom said. "Maybe if we keep them until they're ransomed, it means we keep them here a long, long time." "Now that's something," Ben said. "Why couldn't you say that before? We'll keep them until they're ransomed, a good long time. Boy, that'll be bothersome. They'll be eating up everything and always trying to get loose. How could they get loose if there's a guard watching over them?" Tom asked. "A guard? Well, that is good," Ben said. "So somebody's got to sit up all night and never get any sleep, just to watch them. I think that's foolish. I don't see why we have to do that." "Because it's in the books, that's why," Tom said. "Now, Ben, do you want to do things the right way or not? Don't you think the people who made the books know the right ways to do things? Do you think you can teach them anything?" "Not at all. No, sir, we'll just go on and ransom them in the regular way." Little Tommy Barnes was asleep by now, and when they woke him up he was scared and started to cry. He said he wanted to go home to his ma. He didn't want to be a robber anymore. They all made fun of him for that, which made him mad, and he said he would tell everyone our secrets. Tom gave him 5 cents to keep quiet and said we would meet again next week to plan our first robberies. After the walk home, I climbed back up the shed and crept into my window just before dawn. My new clothes were all greased up and covered with clay, and I was dog-tired. Chapter 2: A Bad Sign. As the boys had said, my pap hadn't been seen for more than a year, and that was fine by me. I didn't want to see him ever again. He used to get angry with me and cuff me with the back of his hand, though I used to hide in the woods most of the time when he was around. Some people even said he had died, but I didn't believe them. I believed the old man would turn up again. But I wished he wouldn't. The boys and I played robbers now and then for about a month. Then I quit. All the boys did. We hadn't robbed anybody, only pretended. We used to hop out of the woods and go charging down on people in carts who were taking plants and animals to market. But we never robbed any of them. Tom called the hogs gold treasure, and he called the turnips and stuffed jewelry, and we would go to the cave and talk about what we had done. I just couldn't see any profit in it. 3 or 4 months passed and it was well into the winter now. I had been to school. I could spell and read and write a little, and could say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35. I didn't think I could get higher than that if I lived forever. At first I hated the school, but by and by I found I could stand it. Whenever I got too tired of it I played hooky. The trouble that would bring the next day cheered me up. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so hard on me. Living in a house and sleeping in a bed were still a little uncomfortable. Before the cold weather came I would slip out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and that was restful for me. I liked the old ways best, but I was beginning to like the new ones a little bit, too. The widow said I was coming along and doing well. She said she wasn't ashamed of me. One morning I happened to knock over the salt shaker at breakfast, which was bad luck. It made me terribly nervous and worried. I felt so bad that I had to go for a walk to try and figure out how to keep off the bad luck. I knew something would happen. I went down to the front garden and climbed over a fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground and I saw somebody's footprints. This person had come up from the quarry and stood around for a while. Then he went back around the garden fence. It was strange that he hadn't come in or knocked on the door after standing around like that. I was curious. I was going to follow the tracks, but then I bent down to look at them closer. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with big nails, a sign to keep off the devil. It was something I recognized from my pap's shoes. I started running as fast as I could. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see anybody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quickly as I could get there. He asked if I had come for some of the money he was keeping for me. "No, sir," I said. "I don't want it at all. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the 6,000 and everything else." He looked surprised and couldn't seem to figure it out. "Please take it," I said. "And don't ask me anything. Then I won't have to tell any lies." It took some convincing. At last he made me sign a piece of paper. He said it would mean I had given him all of my money and property. Then I left to find Miss Watson's slave, Im, who had some magic items that were supposed to be able to tell the future. He knew all about good and bad luck. I told Jim that my pap was here again and that I had found his tracks in the snow. I wanted to know what he was going to do and how long he was going to stay. Jim took an old hairball that had come from a bowl, which he said was supposed to be magic. It was as big as a fist. Jim said it had a spirit inside. He shook it, listened to it, and dropped it on the floor. He did this again and again, and then he put his ear against it to listen. He said it wouldn't talk without money. I had an old fake quarter and asked if the hairball could tell the difference. Jim said it probably couldn't, so we cleaned up my quarter and put it underneath the hairball. He listened to it one more time and said it was ready to tell my fortune. "Your old father doesn't know yet what he's going to do," Jim said. "Sometimes he thinks he'll go away and then he thinks he'll stay. The best is to rest easy and let the old man make his own way. But you are all right. You're going to have great trouble in your life, and great joy. Sometimes you're going to get hurt and sometimes you're going to get sick, but every time you're going to get well again. You should keep away from water as much as you can. And don't take any risks. I left feeling a little better, but still mighty nervous. Well, I didn't have to wait too long. When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat my pap. I shut the door, and when I turned around, there he was. I used to be scared of him all the time because of how badly he treated me. I guess I was a little scared right then, too. But after I got over the surprise of seeing him so suddenly, I realized I wasn't scared of him very much at all. He was almost 50 and he looked it. His hair was long, tangled, and greasy. It hung down and you could see his eyes shining through like he was behind some vines. It was all black, no gray. So was his long shaggy beard. There was no color in his face, where his face showed. It was white, but not like a person. It was a kind of white that would make a person sick to see, tree-toad white, or fish-belly white. As for his clothes, they were just rags. He sat with one ankle resting on the other knee. The boot on that foot was broken and 2 of his toes stuck through. He moved them now and then as he talked. His hat was on the floor, an old black slouch hat with the top caved in, like a lid. I stood looking at him and he sat there looking at me. His chair was tilted back just a little. I set the candle down and noticed the window was up. He must have climbed in by the shed. He kept looking me over. Finally he said, "Nice clothes. You think you're pretty special now, don't you?" "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not," I said. "Don't give me none of your lip," he said. "You've put on great frills since I've been away. You're educated, too, they say. You can read and write. You think you're better than your father, now, don't you? Just because he can't? Who told you to mess with such foolishness, hey? Who said you could?" "The widow. She told me." "The widow, hey? And who told her she could stick her nose in someone else's business?" "Nobody ever told her," I said. "Well, I'll teach her how to meddle. Look here, you drop that school, you hear? I'll teach those people to bring up a boy to think he's better than his own father. Don't let me catch you fooling around at that school again. Your mother couldn't read or write before she died. None of her family could before they died. I can't, and here you're acting up like this. I'm not going to stand it. Say, let me hear you read." I took up a book and started something about a war. After about half a minute, he knocked the book out of my hand. "It's true," he said. "You can do it." I had my doubts. "Look here, you stop putting on those frills acting like you're better than me." "I won't have it." He sat there mumbling and grumbling for a minute. Then he said, "Aren't you fancy? A bed, bedclothes, a piece of carpet on the floor, and your own father has to sleep outside with the hogs. I've been in town 2 days and all I hear about is how you're rich now. I heard about it all the way down the river. That's why I came back. You get that money for me tomorrow. I want it." "I don't have any money," I said. "You're lying. Judge Thatcher's got it. You get it." "I want it. I don't have any money." "You can ask Judge Thatcher. He'll tell you the same." "All right, I'll ask him. I'll make him talk, too. Say, how much do you have in your pockets? Give it to me." "I only have about $1 and I want that to dash. It doesn't make a difference why you want it," he said. "Hand it over." He took the money and bit down on the coins to check if they were real. Then he said he was going to town to have some fun and get into trouble. Finally he climbed out of the window. But then he stuck his head back in and had more bad words for me about my new life and how I was trying to be better than him. Just when I thought he was really gone, he stuck his head back in again and told me to stay away from school. He said he would be watching out for me there. Chapter 3, Pap's Cabin. The next day Pap went to Judge Thatcher's office. He bullied the judge and tried to make him give up the money, but it didn't work. Then Pap swore he'd get the money through the courts. There was a new judge in town and he didn't know my Pap. The new judge said the courts must not separate families if they could help it. He said he'd rather not take a child away from his father. So Judge Thatcher and the widow had to give up trying to keep Pap away from me. Pretty soon my Pap went after Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money. He chased after me, too, for not stopping school. He caught me a couple of times, but I went to school just the same. Most of the time I just dodged him or outran him. I hadn't liked school that much before, but now I liked it just to spite my Pap. He started hanging around the widow's place, too. Finally she told him that she would make trouble for him if he didn't stop. Well, that made him mad, so one day he waited for me in secret and grabbed me when I wasn't looking. He took me upriver to an old log hut. The hut was so deep in the forest that you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time. I never had a chance to run off. We spent all day in that old cabin. At night he always locked the door and put the key under his head. He had a gun he'd stolen and we fished and hunted. That was how we lived. Every once in a while he locked me in and went down to the store to trade fish and game for supplies. It was kind of lazy and jolly, lying around all day with no books or studying to do. 2 months or more passed and my clothes were all rags and dirt again. I couldn't figure out how I had liked it so much at the widow's place, where you had to wash and eat off a plate, comb your hair, go to bed and get up at regular times, and always be bothering about a book. I didn't want to go back. On the other hand, I also didn't want to stay with Pap. I had tried to get out of the cabin many times, but I could never find a way. The windows were too small and the chimney too narrow for me to climb. I had searched the place 100 times. Finally, one day I found an old rusty wood saw and started sawing at a section of the big bottom log. I wanted to make a hole just big enough to crawl through. It was a long job, but I was getting toward the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I hid the signs of my work and pretty soon Pap came in. He wasn't in a good mood, which was normal. He had been in town and everything was going wrong in the courts. It was a long, slow process. His lawyer said he might lose the case and I would have to go back to the widow. Well, I didn't want that. At one point, Pap got so angry talking about it that he kicked an old barrel and hurt his foot. He hopped around, yelling and cursing for a long time. He was angrier than ever. The old man made me go to the boat to fetch the things he had brought. Outside, I thought it all over and decided I would leave with the gun and some fishing lines. I would hide in the woods when I ran away. I wouldn't stay in one place, but just march right across the country, mostly at night. I could hunt and fish to stay alive. I would get so far away that neither the old man nor the widow would ever find me. After supper, Pap was in a very bad mood. I guessed he would be asleep soon. Then I could steal the key, or saw myself out. He didn't fall asleep, though. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy that I couldn't keep my eyes open. Before I knew it, I was sound asleep. All of a sudden there was an awful scream and I was up. Pap was looking wild. He was skipping around and yelling about snakes. He said they were crawling up his legs and then he would jump and scream. But I couldn't see any snakes. I've never seen a man look so wild in his eyes. He was seeing things and I thought he might be sick, or even crazy. Pretty soon he got tired and fell down. Then he rolled over and over very fast. He was kicking things, grabbing at the air with his hands, and screaming that there were devils all over him. Finally he got tired again and laid still for a while, moaning. Tramp, tramp, tramp. That's the dead, he said. Tramp, tramp, tramp. They're coming after me, but I won't go. They're here. Don't touch me. Your hands are cold, let go. Oh, leave a poor devil alone. Then he crawled away, begging to be left alone. He wrapped himself in a blanket and started to cry. By and by, he jumped up and ran after me. He chased me around the hut, calling me the angel of death. Once, he caught me by the jacket between my shoulders. I thought I was a goner, but I slid out of the jacket as quick as lightning and saved myself. Soon he was all tired out again and dropped down with his back against the door. He dozed off pretty soon. I climbed up on a chair as quietly as I could and got the gun. I made sure it was loaded and laid it across a barrel, pointing it toward Pap. Then I sat and waited for him to move. And how slow and still the time did drag along. Chapter 4, A Discovery. Get up! What are you doing? It was after sunrise and I had been sound asleep. Pap was standing over me looking sour and sick. He said, "What are you doing with this gun?" I realized he didn't know anything about what he had been doing last night, so I said, "Somebody tried to get in." I was waiting for him. "Why didn't you wake me up?" I tried, but I couldn't. I couldn't budge you. Well, all right. Don't stand there all day. Go out and see if there's a fish on the line for breakfast. He unlocked the door and I ran out to the riverbank. I noticed some tree branches and things floating downstream, so I knew the river had begun to rise. I walked along the bank and saw a canoe. A beauty, too, about 13 or 14 feet long. I jumped into the water head first, clothes on and all, and swam for it. At first I thought my pap would be glad to see the canoe. It would be worth $10 at least. But when I got to shore, Pap wasn't in sight. Just then I had another idea. I decided to hide the canoe. Then, instead of hiding in the woods when I ran away, I could go down the river about 50 miles and camp in one place for good. I was pretty close to the cabin by this time. I kept thinking I could hear the old man coming, but I was finally able to get the canoe hidden. Then I saw Pap down the path. He was aiming the gun at some birds in the distance. He hadn't seen anything. While Pap and I rested after breakfast, I tried to think of a way to keep him and the widow from trying to follow me. That would be better than just hoping I could get away before they noticed I was gone. I couldn't figure it out for a while, but by and by Pap sat up to drink some water and said, "The next time a man comes prowling around here you wake me up, you hear?" That man was up to no good. "The next time you better wake me up." Then he lay down and fell asleep. What he said gave me the very idea I wanted. I could fix it now so nobody would ever think of following me. At about noon we got up and walked along the bank. The river was rising pretty fast and lots of driftwood was going by. Pretty soon, along came part of a raft, 9 logs tied together. We went out and pulled it ashore. Pap wanted to head right to town and sell the logs, so he locked me in the cabin, took our little boat, and started towing the raft. It must have been around 3:30. I didn't think he would come back that night. I waited until I thought he was far enough away, and then I went to work with my saw. I was out of the cabin before he was on the other side of the river. I took all of our supplies to the canoe, the cornmeal, side of bacon, all the coffee and sugar, and the ammunition. I took the bucket and gourd, a dipper, a tin cup, my old saw, 2 blankets, the skillet, and the coffee pot. I also took fish lines, matches, and a few other things, everything that was worth a cent. I cleaned out the place. I wanted an axe, but there was only one and I had a special plan for it. Finally, I packed up the gun. I covered up the tracks I had made and patched up the hole I had cut in the back of the cabin. I stood on the riverbank and looked out over the river. All safe. Then I took the axe and smashed in the door. It was all part of my plan. I beat it and hacked at it a lot. Then I poured some old pig's blood all around and dragged a sack full of rocks along the ground toward the river. That left gruesome-looking tracks, as if a body had been dragged. I wished Tom Sawyer was there. I knew he would have been interested in this kind of business and thrown in some fancy touches. Next, I pulled out some of my hair. I made sure the axe was covered with the pig's blood and stuck those bits of hair to the axe. I threw the axe into the corner of the cabin. Then I thought of one more thing. I took the sack of cornmeal, tore a small hole in it, and left a trail going in the other direction from my canoe. I carried the sack through the grass to a shallow lake. I dropped the stone that Pap used to sharpen his knife there, too, as if it was left by accident. Then I tied up the hole in the sack of cornmeal and brought it back to the canoe. It was about dark now, so I moved the canoe down the river under some willows that hung over the bank and waited for the moon to rise. I ate a bit and laid down in the canoe to think up a plan. I said to myself, they'll follow the tracks to the shore and look in the river for me. Then they'll follow that trail of cornmeal to the lake and search around there. They'll think a robber killed me and took all the things. They won't ever look for anything but my dead body. They'll soon get tired of that and then they won't look for me anymore. I decided to hide out on Jackson's Island. I knew the place pretty well and nobody ever went there. Then I could paddle to the town at night, slink around, and pick up things I wanted. I was pretty tired and soon fell asleep. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was for a minute. I sat up and looked around, a little scared. Then I remembered. The river looked miles and miles across. The moon was so bright that I could have counted all the logs that drifted along, black and still. Everything was dead quiet. It looked late. It even smelled late, if you know what I mean. I don't know any other words to describe it. I yawned and stretched and was about to unhitch and start paddling when heard a sound on the water. I listened and pretty soon I made it out. It was that dull, regular kind of sound that comes from oars moving in the water when it's a still night. I peeped out through the willow branches and there it was, a little boat away across the water. I couldn't tell how many people were in it. It kept coming. When it got closer, I saw there was only one man in it. I thought it might be Pap, even though I wasn't expecting him. Soon he came so close I could have reached out and touched him. Sure enough, it was Pap. I didn't lose any time. In a minute I was moving the canoe quietly down the river. I got a few miles away, then moved to the middle of the river. Pretty soon I would be passing the ferry landing and people might see me if I got too close. I got out among the driftwood. Then I laid down in the bottom of the canoe so no one would see me and let it just float. I laid there and had a good rest, looking away into the sky. There wasn't a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay down on your back in the moonlight. I'd never known that before. And how far a person can hear on the water. I heard people talking at the ferry landing. I heard what they said, too. Every word of it. One man said the days were getting longer now, the nights shorter. Another said that this wasn't one of the short ones and then they laughed. I heard one man say it was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. After that, the talk got farther and farther away. I couldn't make out the words anymore, but I could hear them mumble and now and then a laugh, too. But it seemed a long way off. After a while, I sat up. There was Jackson's Island, covered with trees and looking big, dark, and solid, like a steamboat without any lights. It didn't take me long to get there. I paddled the canoe into a section of the bank that I knew about.